Okay, Bulavanaka, everybody. I think we'll make a start. So I'm delighted to welcome everybody to our second seminar in the Language Matters in the Pacific series. And before we start, I've had just a few queries from other people about what the series is about and how others can get involved. So the idea is that we will keep this series going roughly once every month during USP semesters at least, for as long as we've got the interest and as long as people want to join us. What we will do is we will select a different sector or area of public interest every month, and we will invite panelists who have experience within those areas to talk about why language matters in that space. So for this semester, I have tied the themes quite closely to my own linguistics course, which is English in the Pacific, so that my students can engage with these discussions about multilingualism all the way through their course and in their final assignment. But we will then branch out to any area from conservation, aid and development, health and well-being, etc. Like language is relevant in every walk of life. So the idea is that we will help USP students engage with what is happening in the world beyond graduation and get some of what we talk about in universities out into the public space as well, to try and just get everybody talking about why language matters. So yes, we certainly do welcome interest from anyone who thinks they would like to propose a topic, perhaps get some good speakers. So please do contact us if that is of interest. So moving back to today's session, I am personally very excited to have this one today. This is an area quite close to my heart. And we do have an excellent lineup of speakers for you today. And so I am personally very grateful as well that everybody said yes so enthusiastically to my slightly nervous request. And also, before I hand over to our moderator for today, I would like to acknowledge as well that there are quite a few other names I can see in the participant list who are also very closely involved in this sector and have been working for many, many years. This is certainly not a new topic. So I would like to acknowledge there's a lot of people here today who know a lot about this topic from across the region. So with that in mind, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Hetty Vekuni from the Institute of Education. She's going to be our moderator for today, and she will introduce those speakers before we get started. So thank you, Hetty. I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Fiona. Bulavinaka, Maloni, hello Ogeta, hello Maori, Talofalava, Malolele. Warm greetings to you all, to our panelists for this evening's Talanoa, and to you, our audience, wherever you are joining us from. I hope you've had a good day, and I hope that this session will help you end the day on a high note. First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Anna Hetty-Veikune, and I am the Fellow in Curriculum and Literacy at the Institute of Education, USP. I'm based at Tonga campus, but today I'm joining you from USP RMI campus. I'm here with other members of our team, running a workshop to support RMI officers to write their own literacy and numeracy resources in Marshallese and also in English. I'm most happy to have been asked to moderate this Talanoa, and I am privileged to introduce to you our most esteemed panel this evening, who will be sharing with us all their experiences and expertise in this second seminar in the Language Matters in the Pacific series. So just a brief background to today's seminar, which focuses on language in education. In the 2023 Conference for Pacific Education Ministers, the priority outcome agreed was that indigenous knowledge, culture, and language should be embedded in curriculum development, teacher training programs, and delivery. Our panelists for today are experienced educators and policymakers from across the region, and they'll be sharing about this priority and what it might mean in practice. So there'll be a range of topics that we will talk about today, talking about how our indigenous languages can be embedded into our education systems, how we might focus on pedagogical and cultural benefits. We'll be talking about successful learning of second and third languages like French and English, maybe talk about the challenges as well as specific research findings, and maybe point ways towards, ways forward for language in education policy and practice. Overall, I hope the panelists will leave you with much to consider, ponder over, and talanoa about long after this session. Let me introduce the panelists for tonight. First of all, we have Elaine Lameta. Elaine Lameta is the Director of Education for the Tokelau Department of Education. She has a wealth of experience and engagement with Tokelau education, working on curriculum, school leadership, teacher development, and Tokelau language resources. A graduate of Massey University and Victoria University of Wellington, her professional and academic background is in applied linguistics with a strong interest in bilingual education, language research, and language policy. Maloni, Director Elaine.
Maloni, thank you.
Our second panelist for this evening is Lanelle Tanangada. She served as the Solomon Islands Minister of Education from 2020 to 2024. And before that, she was the Minister of Women, Youth, Children, and Family Affairs. A teacher by profession, she holds a postgraduate diploma and master's in education from the University of Waikato, for which she conducted a study of language use in secondary school classrooms in the Solomon Islands. She currently serves as Policy Secretary in the Policy Implementation, Monitoring and Evaluation Unit of the Office of the Prime Minister and Cabinet. Hello, Ogeta Lanelle.
Hello.
Our third panelist for this afternoon is Helen Tam Tam. She is a literacy specialist for vernacular languages in Vanuatu's Curriculum Development Unit. In this position, she has played an instrumental role in the implementation of the National Vernacular Language Policy, supporting materials development, awareness raising, and teacher development. She's a graduate of the University of Technology, Sydney, with a Master of Arts in Teaching Languages, and she's also currently the chair of the Program Advisory Committee for USP Linguistics Programs. Hello, Helen.
Hello.
This evening, we also have Arites Bosibara. Arites is the English Curriculum Officer for the Kiribati Curriculum Unit. In this role, she has coordinated and overseen the development of the new English curriculum for years 7 and 8, had been involved in its monitoring and evaluation. She has recently completed a postgraduate diploma in applied linguistics and English language teaching at the University of the South Pacific, and she is now in the final stages of her master's in linguistics. For her study, she has been researching the way the English curriculum is implemented in practice, looking at both the integration of skills and the use of bilingualism in teacher talk. Maori Arites.
Maori.
Our last panelist for this afternoon is Ainsley Chu Ling So'o. Ainsley is an educator, researcher, author, and translator who worked for many years as a language specialist for the Samoa Ministry of Education. In this and other roles, she has been involved in Samoa's bilingual education policy, standardization of the Samoan language, and the teaching of Samoan as a second language. She holds a postgraduate diploma in applied linguistics and a master's degree in linguistics from the Australian National University. Talofalava, Ainsley.
Aloha, everybody.
So before we begin our talanoa this evening, I just have a few instructions before we begin. You may indicate with a raised hand emoji or maybe on the chat box if you want to speak during the presentation, or if you want to just ask your questions onto the chat box and we will try to answer them as we progress. If not, you can wait until we've finished answering all of the questions, and then we will open the floor for an opportunity to dalanoa at the end there. You will also note that there are 1 or 2 questions that I will direct to specific panelists because they've been at the event referred to in the question, and then the rest of the questions will be for all of the panelists. I hope that will be fine with everyone. So without further ado, let me begin with the first question for this evening. And this one is directed to Lanelle and also to Elaine, but also to some of you who might also know something about this conference of Pacific Education Ministers. So our first question is to begin to look at the latest developments at the regional level and the commitments that ministers of education have recently made about Pacific languages in education. So I'm going to ask Lanelle and Elaine, who were present at this 2023 conference of Pacific Education Ministers, to explain what happened at that meeting and what the outcomes were. Malo, if I could hand it over, please, to Lanelle first, and then Elaine.
Thank you, moderator, and Bulavinaka to everyone. Hello from Solomon Islands. For the first question, yes, Elaine and myself, we were privileged to be part of the first CPEM, the Conference for Pacific Education Ministers, which was held in March last year in Auckland. And Dr. Fiona has also mentioned in terms of what the ministers came up with, and it is acknowledging indigenous knowledge, culture, and language, and it should be embedded in the curriculum development, teacher training programs, and delivery in the Pacific. And it's very important that we acknowledge, as a Pacific, we acknowledge that we have shared cultural values and historical links, and we share the same aspiration and challenges for education. And as a former minister attending during that meeting, it was very encouraging to see that all the ministers who attended unanimously supported that we need to, as a Pacific, we need to address this. And it stemmed from the minister's response to the keynote address which was delivered by Honorable Jan Tinetti, who was the Minister of Education for New Zealand government, sharing the experience of New Zealand having more than 70 Pacific bilingual and immersion learning services in New Zealand, and what the experiences they had. And then the minister's response to that was, we came up with the outcome, and that is to encourage and acknowledge the importance of Pacific language, culture, and history. That really helps to improve outcomes for students. I think I'll allow Elaine to further share on the experiences that we had during the CPM meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Maloni, everyone. Thank you, Lanelle. So just to add to that, probably to go back a little bit to give some background to the CPM. You may be aware that this was a conference, the first conference of Pacific Education Ministers, but before that, since 2001, it was always the Forum of Education Ministers. But along the way, it's been acknowledged that there's a wide, multiple layers or levels of stakeholders that have an important contribution in leadership in education in the Pacific. So opening it up to a conference format meant that we could have participation from civil society groups, such as people with disabilities. Also, it's opening it up to the crop agencies, who themselves are key implementers of many of the decisions. It also drew in a lot of funders, a lot of people who sponsor our education programs. So I think the change in the format from just forum education ministers to a conference type format is very helpful for all of us to understand that, because this particular high-level meeting sets a direction, collective direction for matters of education across the region, things that we can collectively be implementing, but also at the national level as well. If our policies, our leaders are in agreement with those directions, but really critical for us, it means that the resourcing to implement whatever those things are can be set in motion. So the participation of groups such as the UN agencies, Australia, New Zealand, people who enable through funding our developments is really critical to this particular meeting, which I think is every second year. In any case, it's important. So by committing to the language focus for education across the region, we can be confident that that begins the process of bringing in the resourcing to back up. However, this is going to take up in the form of our regional initiatives and in the form of how our national plans can put through priorities in relation to this particular language commitment. I think for me, if we look at that commitment that's been made by the ministers, if we put it in a bigger context, we could say that the bigger thing here is language planning. As you know, while they mention, and they do mention the importance of the inclusion of our indigenous knowledge, culture, and language in our curriculum, teacher training, as well as programs and delivery. As educators, we want to see that in terms of the bigger picture of language planning. It is indeed about language planning, which of course is going to look at necessarily the two key dimensions of language status, the relative positioning of our languages, where there are other languages that exist within our countries. Importantly, that means policies, that means resourcing, but it also means we need to look at how we bring in the advancement and the development of our language structures. Those two dimensions work hand in hand. So it's not enough to say curriculum implementation, but we've got to see it bigger picture: language planning, status planning, and structure planning for our structures. That means vocabulary, that means vocabulary creation, that means the increase of our corpus, a whole lot of things. So I don't want to go into details, but I just wanted to raise that ministers have made a really important commitment here. But for us, for those of us in linguistics, applied linguistics, we immediately think language planning, status planning for our languages, structural planning for our languages. What do we do in terms of specifics that we can collectively agree to as a region, but also within our own countries? I'll stop there because there are others to contribute. Thank you, Hetty.
Thank you, Director Elaine. And I think what's coming to me, I was at this conference as well, but for me, I saw it as a major victory and a victory for language in education for our island nations. And as Director has alluded to, it does go back to language planning and everything that is involved in the language planning, the resourcing, the training, and then of course the delivery. So I just want to bring the conversation down now from all of the high level talking, all of the high level commitment, and all of the talking at the conference. We're now going to look at what it looks like in our island nations, right? So my next question is to everyone. Can you please very briefly introduce what the current policy is in your own countries? Which languages are used as the medium of instruction across the curriculum at different levels, and which languages are taught as subjects at different levels? So I think I'm going to ask Arites first.
Hi, hello everyone. Can anyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'll give a brief summary of the language policy in my country, Kiribati. The language policy on paper says this: the percentage of English increases from 5% in preschool up to 80% in the senior secondary schools. There is no formula or recipe on how to divide the percentage, but the idea is that teachers should provide a portion of their teaching the students in their mother tongue, and then in order to support student learning. So as the teachers, as there is no like recipe to divide the percentage, we hope that the teachers will use the mother tongue in every subject in order to support the student learning and to reduce the portion of their mother tongue as the student gradually progress in the system. So that's the idea of the language policy in Kiribati. But like in practice, all the resources are produced in year 1, from year 1 up to year 13. All the syllabus and the teacher guides are produced in English. But from year 1 to year 4, all the resources, all the what you call it, the medium of instruction is the Kiribati L1. In year 5 and year 6, as the percentage of the English gradually increases in year 5 and year 6 to 60%, it doesn't really mean that 60% should be used for the content subject and the 40% for entirely to teach the Kiribati and the English. But in year 5 and year 6, all the mostly of the resources are produced in English. So there is an abrupt shift in practice on how the bilingual policy is to be applied. So that's the short summary of how the language policy is implemented in Kiribati at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Arites. I just want to ask Ainsley now to talk a little bit about Samoa.
Thank you. I must mention too that there was another bilingual policy before this one, and I don't want to confuse you yet. I think my colleague, Dr. Robert Early, I saw him somewhere. He would be able to help me out with that if there is a question referring back to the first bilingual policy that we developed. I managed to get hold of the recent one. That's the current one beginning this year. So the current one is now a bilingual policy from 2024 to 2029. This is for the next 5 years. Everything is kind of the same as the original bilingual policy that we set out on the importance of, bringing in the first language into the school, and introducing English later on, like we have always done with our education system before it was put on paper. Because for your information too, we kind of talk about policy, but it was never on paper. But this time it's written down, like we have indicated in our bilingual education policy in 2011. So that was when that one was implemented. The second one, which was the review of that first one, beginning this year, they are still using the same information about bilingual policy. The only problem that we have, even though we only have 2 languages, which is Samoan and English, we were having problems on how to arrange the percentage of Samoan and English from years 1 up to the secondary level. So we developed different options for the teachers, but knowingly, teachers are quite adamant at times and reluctant to do things that will change their usual way of teaching. We have to come to another solution of really opting or selecting one that would be suitable for them. Anyway, I'll just leave that one behind, because that policy that we had was like, for year 1, it was totally just Samoan. In year 2, it was then the percentage of 10% English and 90% Samoan. This with English in year 1. In year 2, it was just rhymes, you know, saying the alphabet in English. In year 3, it was 20-80. Year 4, 70, like that, until we reached year 6, and then it was 50-50 all along, 50 for Samoan, 50 for English. This is in the teaching of the other subjects. Our language subjects are Samoan and English. The other subjects for primary in particular, math, science, social science, all those other subjects are taught in different levels now with this new bilingual policy beginning this year. The good thing about this bilingual policy in its review is that they have maintained the use of both languages right through. In this new one, they have now kind of opt to use both languages, not just one or the other. You know how they decide on whether to use Samoan or English, but they now have to use both languages in teaching the other subjects. When it comes to Samoan, it's Samoan, just Samoan. When it's English, it's just English. Now, this is, again, it's good on paper where we, again, have the percentage like from years 2 to year 5, it's like 50 to 60% of English, between English and Samoan. And then from year 6 to year 8, it goes up to 60, between 60 and 80%. Then in the secondary level from years 9 up to 12, it's between 80 and 100%. Again, even up to the secondary level, they still have the option to use both languages when teaching other subjects. Yeah, I did mention that I think that was the main change in the policy between the last one that was implemented or started in 2011 and this current one that we have started this year in 2024. It's just trying to make it or simplify it for the teachers on how to teach the different subjects on what percentage of Samoan and what percentage of English. So we have kind of make room for the use of either languages, even as early as kindergarten and year 1, they have now allowed, because we do have other children coming into school who can only speak English. And we have schools too that would take away English and start the child with Samoan only from year 1. So those are the changes. But the main thing about it, you know, even with assessment, when it comes to assessment, both languages are considered equally treated. Good on paper, but again, we question the resources and how to really make sure it happens, because no, the bottom line is the teachers. We depend on the teachers as the forefronters of how they would address and do it perfectly. And I think this is a good avenue for us to kind of share ideas on how to do it. You know, with Samoan, Elaine and I have been discussing this language policies for a long time with just the 2 languages, and we still have problems. So that's my just brief description of the current policy.
Thank you, Pafitai Ainsley. I'm now going to just move it along to Helen. Helen?
Sorry, do you want to just move one more? Helen just dropped out and I just need to get the unmute
okay,
again.
So we'll go back to Elaine and Lanelle.
Okay. Maloni, for Tokelau, our goal is that our students would develop equally high levels of competence, i.e. Full literacy in both Tokelau and English. The policy is that we give equal value to both languages as medium of instruction. Once a sufficient base has been developed in the second language, English. The transition from first to second language is gradual, giving each language sufficient development time before switching. So in essence, by the time our students are in year 7, the 2 languages expected to be treated as having 50% of instruction time in each curriculum area, besides the different times for either English or Tokelau in the curriculum, in the timetable. What it means is that by the time our students are in year 11, the intention is that Tokelau language has been allowed as the medium of instruction in any subject, in every subject. Unfortunately, in terms of implementation, because of we do not have many teachers at all of Tokelau heritage in the secondary area, especially. It's not been practicable to implement that. So sadly, it comes down to who are the teachers. So increasingly now also in primary level, where the medium of instruction is supposed to be in Ngangana Tokelau, we have increasingly brought in teachers from outside who are non-Tokelauan. So of course they begin to teach English from primary level where it's supposed to be Ngangana Tokelau. This policy is about 18 years old. It needs to be revised because there's been much shift, language shift in our young people's language use. There's a lot of use of English now in the community, in the homes. So it really has to look at where the stress should be in terms of the medium of instruction. The goal remains the same because we're wanting our students to both be competent in Ngangana Tokelau and in English. There's no denying that. It's what type of arrangement will best produce those outcomes. So I'll leave it at that for now because there's a few other questions relating to language and culture in the curriculum. Thank you, Hetty.
Thank you, Elaine. I'm going to ask Helen before Lanelle, while we still have her, in case she drops out again. Helen, please, if you could share about the medium of instruction in Vanuatu.
Okay, we had there's a language policy that was drafted in 2012, and during the curriculum reform in 2015, we were able to implement this language policy, and the language policy for the first time ever, it allowed vernacular languages to be used in the classroom in the early years. And so there were numerous teacher guides plus resources were developed. And the language of instruction in the early years was the mother tongue. In that language policy, it stated the early exit model. That's meaning by the time that children are in E3, the language will be dropped and then they should just concentrate on the English. But somehow we realized with the researchers, there was Dr. Robert Ely who was there and Marianne Curtis, that it cannot be so. The second language had to be taken in gradually. And so we adopted the late exit model. And so we had all these resources to be able to enable students to be taught in their first language. And we also had books written for the for gradually that in a later question. And somehow in 2020, there was another national language policy that was presented by the Prime Minister's office. And it re-emphasized the use of English and French as the official languages again, because this is according to the Constitution. But at the school level, and all the work achieved so far by the curriculum during the curriculum reform, we saw there was no change to the importance of the constitutional statements about the key role of English and French as international languages of education. However, we now know that the best way to achieve a high level of English or French for children to begin with a strong foundation has to be in their local languages. And we also want to aim to become a society with high levels of multilingual ability in our indigenous languages, in the national language, and in the international language. So hence the Curriculum Development Unit today continues to support the vernacular in their classrooms, as well as beginning learning of English and French gradually. So this is where we are at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Thomas, Helen. I'm now going to ask Landau to finish off that question.
Thank you, Hetty. Solomon Islands is very diverse in terms of its language. We have more than 71 languages, and it used to be the English-only policy from the first act, and so English is the medium of instruction in the classroom, and it is expected that teachers use English as the medium of instruction. Everything is written in English, but then in the recent years, when they reviewed the National Education Action Plan, we find that there's acknowledgement of the importance of vernacular education. So in 2010, there was work progress that had started, and around 2010, there was a development for the policy statement and guidelines for the use of vernacular languages and English in education in Solomon Islands. And I also acknowledge Timothy Max, who is also in the panel in our webinar this evening, who is very instrumental in supporting and helping the Solomon Islands government, the Ministry of Education and Human Resources Development, in being one of those that helped to develop the language policy. And so in the policy,
I think Lanelle has a bit of a problem, seems to be a bit frozen there.
it acknowledges that the first in Malaita, South Malaita, which is Sa language, and hello?
Yep, you're still on.
Okay. Okay, thank you. And so these two pilot projects, they've started, and it was successful in a way that it's shown in the students' performance in terms of having that vernacular learning their mother tongue and then transitioning on to English, and they did really well. Even after many years, they still perform well in their education. The challenge is because we don't have like Tokelau or Samoa, because we have many languages. The challenge for the ministry and the government in terms of this language policy is to have this program rolled out to the other provinces that have different vernacular, and also to have resources for the teachers and the students. So we've just passed the new Education Act 2023 last year, and in the Act, it also acknowledges vernacular education that's something that we will have to continue to work in providing resources and rolling out in other provinces to actually have other vernaculars being taught and having that transitioning from mother tongue to English. We do have Pidgin, which is a lingua franca of the country, but we do have a dictionary, but it's not standardized as yet, where it's actually taught that students understand how the language works and functions, and actually having it as academic language. So at the moment, teachers are still expected to use English as the medium of instruction, but they do, in reality, in the classroom, they also use Pidgin, which is the common language that we also use in the Solomon Islands. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think just to add on to the mix, Tonga has a vernacular language policy. So the children are taught in Tongan, supposed to be in Tongan from ECCE up to year 3 to class 3. And then in the last term of year 3, they have oral English. And that's when we start the progression of X% of English moving upwards until they get to high school, where supposedly they are taught 100% in English. But we know that the reality and the practice of this is not really calculated in terms of percentage and percentages. And I think that's another, I think it's another webinar on its own, this talk about percentages and the divisions and progressions and all of that. I'm now just going to continue to move on. I'm very conscious of the time. I want to start with Ainsley, but to all of you as well after that, if you could explain the culture-related benefits of incorporating vernacular languages into mainstream education. Malo.
Thank you, Hetty. I must say I am quite happy with the development that has been happening in the ministry with relation to how they have extended what we started with our bilingual policy into something else, like even a multi-literacy kind of policy. And this is where they have brought in the culture, encouraging field trips and things like that for children to associate with what's happening around them, rather than just teaching them something that they could easily have picked up when they see it at first hand, you know, doing a cooking or making a special dish. That is where the language development, you know, the real word for that particular thing comes in, whereas in the classroom, it's like it's taught from memory and the children have to try and picture what it is. But I think with this new idea of bringing that in, it has always been in the ministry's, you know, policies in different forms. But again, it has really not eventuated, like really happened. It has happened in some cases in some schools where they have, you know, sometimes they would have culture days, but again, they are still different from actually taking in the children to be immersed and have a look at what is happening with the culture. Even things with, like in Samoan, where we have the respectful forms that we use when we say no, general for I, we say I for eat. And then when we are talking to an older person, we have to say Tausami, things like that. These are the things that are actually learned in school by the children. And I've seen that with my own grandchildren going to school and coming home with their homework, having to write this, you know, polite form of this and that without really knowing what it is. And so in the situation like in our home too, when we sit down for food, that is when we encourage them. Now, what is the word that you say to Papa when you are telling Papa to come and eat? That is where they have to make that choice of picking the right word or the respectful form to use when it happens with older people, you know, things like that. And I think it's a big benefit. Everything is kind of interrelated. We know that with culture, like we always say, it goes with language. And we can never separate language from culture, because that would lose the integrity or the understanding of what that real thing is. Nowadays, we hear singing and, you know, people singing this and saying this. And when you ask them, what is it? They have no idea. But if they were placed in the right environment, like in the culture, they would then understand what is going on. So it should never be separated. It should be brought in. If they cannot do it in the classroom, you know, arrange field trips with the community or wherever they have to go to exercise what they have actually learned in school. There's also another benefit of this culture-related one is this transition from home to school, where I was just noting down how we talked and how we refer to vernacular, mother tongue, indigenous language. Are they all the same to us when we use those terms? I suppose so. But what I'm trying to say here is that the vernacular, the home, you know, language, the mother tongue language, the indigenous language is very important to us. And this should be allowed in the school with the children coming from home with that experience, that knowledge that they have learned from home, brought to school, allow them to continue like that in their mother tongue language, in the vernacular, before we introduce anything, because that was what it was happening before. Children just come into school, and then we also had this influence from the parents, because the parents have no idea. They'll say, we send our children to school to learn English. You're not Samoan. Why are you doing Samoan again? You know, those are the things that the poor teachers have to face with. And so in the end, the teachers have to please the parents too by actually going beyond the policy and say, okay, we're just going to have English then, just to please the parents. I've also noted down this support. If we involve the culture, we would have the support from the community, where they would come in, they would help out with, you know, we have this home school kind of literacy programs that we can develop in, especially in the use of our language. Not so much of English, but we really need to prioritize our first language. I think that is what we really are not doing a proper approach to. We talk about it, but in the end, English always dominates everything. So sharing knowledge between, you know, the community and the children is very important, where you have those hands-on experience for the children to really feel what it is and understand what that culture is. And I'll stop from there.
Malo Ainsley, I'm going to ask Aritesi, please, to give her thoughts on this question, cultural benefits of incorporating vernacular languages into mainstream education. Then I'm going to ask Elaine and Helen.
Thank you. I'll give a brief understanding of what the question is all about from my perspective, in my context. Culture is not it's not at risk in my context, so it's really not a problem. And it is being integrated in every subject, like in the Kiribati, in the math, we produce the resources with using familiar contents, familiar titles, and the stories that the student knows. So in Kiribati, the culture is integrated in every content subject and language subject. So yeah, we embrace our culture, and it is part of the curriculum unit, and all the curriculum resources are produced in the primary level up to the JSS, and most of the stories and most of the resources are produced using our culture as the main topics to teach the student.
Yes. I think we
Yes.
saw it. Yes, Arites, I can remember the readers that we helped your officers develop last year. A lot of the stories were on cultural events and traditions that are important to Kiriba. I'm now going to ask Elaine and then Helen and Lanelle.
Thank you, Hetty. Just quickly, if I could use a Tokelau saying which goes like this: Uhu ki ahanga haka nanu nanu ai, talinga haka longo mai, which means attend to ahanga discussions with attentive ears. Underlying, the spirit underlying that is basically to say, if you listen, if you go to the place of meeting, if you listen to those discussions, you will learn the deeply held beliefs and values of our culture and how those are passed on from generation to generation. So including the vernacular in school, for example, as a context, another context through which our languages are being used, also allows those beliefs, deeply held beliefs, to be passed through. So basically, I guess this is an experience that is shared by all of us, that languages embrace the heart of our nations. And by having it in our school curriculum, we are carrying the heart of our nation by actually providing opportunity for a further exploration of our deeply held values to the generations that are in schools. You know, they're learning about our stories. They're learning about how our people define ourselves, which in our languages would be slightly different from other language groups. So our identity is actually embraced in that. Thank you.
Malo, Elaine. Helen?
Okay. Yeah, this is a very interesting question because we're not looking at language in classrooms just to assist children do well academically. We are also noticing these changes in the community. And yeah, just like we had earlier, the Solomon Islands has many languages, Vanuatu too has too many languages. And to be able to have a policy to cater for all the languages is challenging. The Curriculum Development Unit recently visited a few schools and who have taught vernacular since the beginning of year 2000. This is where a master plan was written, and it had in the master plan, there was mention of the vernacular, but because the whole idea was still very new, there were some pilot schools. So there was, I think a few of those schools that we visited very recently were some schools who had began in the around year 2000, and the support given to the schools were from the Department of Education and the Summer Institute of Linguistics. And so for 2 decades, the communities have witnessed some changes, which we got from the interviews we had with the principals, the teachers, parents and leaders of the schools and communities we visited. They confirmed that they are seeing the languages since the schools have been using vernacular. They noticed that the schools are, the languages are more powerful today, and the languages are revived. There are words that are brought in, and some of these communities are from, you know, they're speakers of Nakanamanga. This is in Tongoa, and speakers of Naka language Notana and Sa language Ranwa South Pentecost. So what's happening now? The languages have confluent because the children, having learned learned through the languages in school, they brought back to the community, to the parents. They were speaking in a proper language. For example, this is one example in here. Most of our language group borrow family terms of English, French, and Bislama. Words like family terms like mama, mommy, daddy, papa, uncle, auntie, meme. Okay, so what happened in the schools was they were taught to use the proper terms of languages of parents or of their family members in the schools. And so when they brought this back, and they've noticed that since the children have been using these proper vernacular terms, there's a lot more respect within the families and the communities. So I just want to share that with the group this afternoon. Yeah, thank you.
Malo, and to Lanelle.
Thank you, Etty. In the Solomon Islands, it's similar as what Arit Tessie said in Kiribati and others, that culture is, the values is embedded in the curriculum of our students in their learning, and even in our national Education Action Plan, it acknowledges that. Even in our Education Act 2023, it acknowledges that the curriculum, what is taught in the classroom, needs to also accommodate culture. So it's basically part of the students. But coming to discuss culture in terms of the importance of their language, which is, we say language is our identity, and to have a vernacular taught in the classroom, and having those students have the appreciation of their identity, which is their language, it will definitely bring the cultures alive, especially with the language. I think the 2 pilot projects which were done, which I've mentioned earlier, there was no study done on the Makira one, but I can recommend to the students, if you can read the PhD thesis for Dr. Karen Galokale. She did a further study in her thesis on examining the vernacular languages and English in education policy and practices, the attitudes of language and perspectives to Sa'a language, Pidgin and English in indigenous community in Solomon Islands. If you read the thesis, you will really find how culture is embedded in the way a language is also imparted to the students. And it's something that for us in the Solomon Islands, in relation to the 2 pilot projects, to continue to further work on that, to see how it will also influence the students. But from Timothy and Martha, who were also engaged with the Arosi language in Makira, they've shared their experience that when the students learned in their mother tongue, you see that they also, that the health has improved. You see that their face is, it just shows the difference in their appreciation of where they come from, their identity, and then also their learning has also improved. So it's very important to have culture and language go hand in hand. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Lanelle, and I want to thank also Brandon Da from UNESCO for your comment on the chat box. Thank you very much. It's really good to begin to connect dots, and I thank you, Lanelle, for naming specific research for those of our postgraduate students, or just any of our students who are joining in, and even our own lecturers, those who are interested to read Dr. Karen's work and other pieces of research that are important to our topic today. When I was listening to you people talking, the word that comes to me is empowering. You know, it's connecting the home and the community to the school. It's easing intergenerational, transfer of intergenerational knowledge. It's all of those nice things that, you know, that warms our heart and our thinking when we think about language and culture and how they are so intertwined, you know, and everything that we value in our culture is contained in our language. And that's what we should be using to teach our children. Just want to move on to the next one. And that question is similar to just the one you finished answering. But if you could talk about the learning related benefits of using our vernacular in our classrooms. So Helen, if you could talk to that as first, and then the others can follow.
Okay, one of the things we are finding, and that the children learn foundational literacy skills best in their languages and at a faster pace. So I'm going to discuss around that. When children learn the literacy skills, it's faster than learning through a language that they are not familiar with. During this, the reform in 2015, when we developed all the guides, the teacher guides for years 1 to 3 were all written in Bislama. And we had all the readers and posters also were written in Bislama. Then we had the readers and the posters translated to over 60 languages. And the idea was the teachers used the teacher guides, which were in Bislama, both in French and English schools, and they should use their vernaculars to teach. And let's think about the child. When he comes to school, he's already speaking a language very well, speaking this language, and he listens very well in this language. So the teacher does not need to teach him the skill of listening and speaking. The teacher can automatically start teaching the students the foundational academic literacy skills in their first language. And through that, they can also lead children to develop critical and higher thinking skills. So I want to take this example of reading. I know that we all understand there's 4 main language skills we have. There's listening, speaking, reading, and writing. So the children have come into school with the listening and the speaking. And so what do they do in reading? So in the reading, we know that in all those main elements, those main skills, they're little elements that have got to be worked on with the teacher. So I'm just going to tackle the reading skill. Now we understand that all the elements of the reading skill is phonics and phonemic awareness, and also fluency, vocabulary, comprehension. Now, when that is all done in the first language, and these are high skills. So when you do that in the first language, when we cover this in the first language, it's much more meaningful, and it makes children be able to read faster. For example, in the phonics and the phonological awareness, or the phonics awareness, we have, through the support of SIL, we do have language primers put in some main schools, some main vernacular schools. And from those primers, students are able to study a sound for a week, and where the sound of a word, and is usually in its initial position, the key word that is used for that key sound for the whole week, and there's the clapping of the syllables, the breaking down of the word, and the building up of the word. That is learned much faster. And then it goes on to fluency. They're able to read, and with natural reading and its accuracy and expression. And then under vocabulary, they know the word, and they can connect to the word, and it makes a logical match. And for comprehension, when they read a little thing about a little story, a story from the keyword, they can understand, interpret what is read. So because they have sufficient vocabulary and there's this background knowledge of the topic. So getting children to study in their first language, we are doing a great justice to our children. And we understand that comprehending text, I mean, that's a real skill. If we are to give text in a foreign language to the students and force them to read this at a very young age when they do not know, then their learning is disturbed. But why I'm raising this, because in the resources we've done, the CDU has prepared this language elements are really laid out in a balanced literacy way, and we've had teachers come back and inform us that children are able to read much faster and able to comprehend because it's done in their language. And so while this is going on, the second language is taught at the same time. So we want children to be very literate in the first language from years 1 to 3. We cannot force the second language to be given in. They need to be they need to be able to do very well in their literacy skills from years 1 to 3. And then gradually we are also adding this English language of French gradually in year 1, but we begin with the oral aspect. So I will touch on that in a later question. But what I'm emphasizing in here, it makes a lot of difference when we teach our children in the first language, you can automatically do the academic skills, whether it's under reading, speaking, listening, and even writing. All those elements of those main skills can be taught very well and very much faster in the first language. And this is what we have. And we are giving assistance to teachers to understand the importance of this and building up the children's academic skills in the languages. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. I'm now going to ask Aritet, please, if you could share, maybe this is part of your research now, maybe talk about the reasons why you encourage teachers and parents of the benefits of using L1.
Thank you. I'd like to share, I really like to share the result that I found, but it is classified at the moment, but I'd like to share a few of the research findings that I found regarding the use of L1. We all know it, like all teachers know that language is a tool for teaching and learning, right? And when the children arrive in our classroom at the age of 5, in my context around maybe 6, most of them will be 6, they arrive with around 2,000 and 3,000 words in their mother tongue. That's our tool for teaching and learning. While using other languages when these kids come into the classroom with these languages. This is why I encourage, and in line with the policy that we have in practice, it specifically mentioned that the use of L1 is 90% in the foundation, and it decreases as the year gradually increase into the senior secondary schools. And this is where the teachers need to see the very importance of using bilingual in my context, to use language, to use L1 to teach the content on all the other subjects. Because the findings, a lot of the findings that I have read, I would like to share. I know all of you have, but I've read a lot of findings regarding the use of L1. Most students learn best when they learn in their mother tongue rather than teaching them a bunch of unfamiliar vocabulary. And the result also said that these kids, the student that they start learning, that they're learning in L2 at the very foundation, will find it hard to catch up in comparison with the student that use L1 from foundation upwards. But we all know that English is important, especially in my context, that it is the only way out of the country, and it is an official language. So we value the use of English, and we value that to teach English, but with the right pedagogy and the right level, and with the right tools. So that's in brief and short, that's what I want to share regarding the use of multilingual, to value the use of bilingual in teaching and learning. Thank you.
Thank you. We look forward to seeing the end of your research, to fully read the results of your study. And Lanelle, please.
Thank you, Hetty. In terms of what has been expressed by my other colleague panelists, it's no exception to Solomon Islands in terms of all of us acknowledging what research is out there. There's vast research done on children in the early years taught in their mother tongue, the L1, and then transitioning on to the second language, which most of us acknowledge is English as a medium of instruction. And in terms of incorporating that, as I've mentioned, the challenges that we have in the Solomon Islands, and from the 2 pilot projects, it's something for us. I would say that we need a strategic approach into how we will roll out the language policy in all the schools in the country, acknowledging that we have many languages, different languages. And there's the difference between learning in a language and learning a language is very important. I think one of the other challenges for us that we have is in terms of the pedagogical practices, and teachers being able to know how to teach a child in their mother tongue, and then transitioning onto English. There's another word that if I can use, translanguaging and bridging those two languages in the classroom, and it's very important. I like the recommendation and the study from Kiribati, and I'm looking forward to reading the final work because that will really help policymakers in terms of what actually can work practically in a setting in a classroom of a country. We can have it on paper, but then the actual the how to do and how it works to help the students to actually understand. And yes, we acknowledge the fact that we start with the L1 and then moving on to English for our context in the Solomon Islands. But then it should not just stop at grade 3, but there should still be a guidance to students to progress further to actually understand those two languages. Code switching is one thing that is very common in the classrooms here in the Solomon Islands. But I see that it's just basically having the students to understand a concept, but in terms of how the language works and the mechanism of language and how it's used to sustain their understanding in the academic English is another issue of its own, which is also a challenge and something that really needs to be studied further. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Lanelle. And now we still have Ainsley and also Elaine, if you have anything else to add on to this question.
Yeah, I'd like to build on to what Lanelle has just mentioned there briefly, and that is the other language, English, the development of English. I think that's a reality that we're really conscious of, that we need to bring into the mix. We acknowledge most definitely the value of our first languages in the early years and right throughout the learning stages for our children. But if we think about the role of language in learning, it might help us to extend to English for academic learning and of course, ultimately the language through by which our students are measured in terms of their outcomes at higher levels at tertiary. We acknowledge that learning becomes increasingly abstract and cognitively demanding as students move through the school system. We acknowledge that the degree to which our students have developed the necessary language skills to cope with learning situations which are increasingly abstract and cognitively demanding as they move through the school system is crucial to their success. Their other language, English, is important now in terms, if I could move our conversation to also acknowledging the crucial role of English or French at those higher levels, because we recognize that the extent to which they master the languages for learning impact on the extent to which they can experience success in schools. Evidently, in most of our systems, they are measured by the way how well they do in English for senior levels as through and onwards to tertiary. So ultimately, we want to be able to be developing and giving our students opportunity to also learn English for academic learning, for the expression of their the display of what it is that they've learned. They've got to be able to use language to apply the necessary mental processes in both languages that are needed to express and elaborate knowledge and reflection. Our children need to be able to use language to reason through to conclusion, first language and their other languages, to read, as it's been mentioned, to understand a wide range of text, to develop arguments, to analyze, synthesize, evaluate ideas. We want to empower them to do that. At this stage, I think we, in the context that I've worked in, we take our first languages to a certain level. We make them then become a subject, but not a medium of instruction. And so that switch is kind of not really empowering them for the other stages. But we've got to attend to the demands of the other language by which their academic success is being measured to a larger extent. So I want to leave it there just to challenge us. How do we enable them to also display, demonstrate their knowledge through their other language. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Ainsley, do you have anything else to add to this question?
Yes, I've been, like you mentioned before, that the question 3 and 4 are quite kind of related to each other. It's just to do with the culture and one to do with learning. But in both cases, you know, the same areas applied. But I was thinking of what Helen mentioned, because I'm another strong believer of teaching phonics for literacy purposes. It has always been a practice in our, you know, situation here that it's like, just because it's in English phonics, it's particular just for teaching of English. And so I have to, because with the language policy, it starts with Samoan. So we had to introduce and teach the teachers on how to teach phonics in Samoan, because that's the first language that the children bring in. And to support what Helen was saying too, when they come in, they have already developed the listening, you know, and the speaking skills. And if we can use the right approach to get them involved through knowing what that sound is and associating it with the letter, they can quickly pick that up. And if that is properly done in Samoan, like in our case, when they start to learn English or read English, it's phonics right through. You know, they only have to learn the other new sounds that are in English, like the sibilants and those different sounds that are quite hard, like mother, you know, and children tend to say mother, or father. And we have to, you know, correct that by saying it's not father, para, but father, the tongue, using the tongue. So the places of articulation when they teach phonics is very important here. And if they are properly done in the first language, when the children come into school, once they start to learn English as a second language, they can easily pick that up just by reading any new word, whether they know it or not. But using phonics, they are able to read both in Samoan and in English or whichever other language. The other benefits too of having the vernacular in the mainstream is, you know, how we have particular vocab or corpus particular to a different part of the culture, like how to make a particular dish like cocoa rice. What are, you know, the ingredients, what is there, how do you do it? You know, that is still in the process of developing literacy, using the steps that they have to do and how to write it down using phonics. And in that way, they will quickly pick that up. We have patterns, you know, those are the other areas that children, oh, what are all the words that you know in Samoan that has this particular pattern? What is the name for this pattern? And that, you know, and these are showed up on our tattoo, on our pea, and, you know, the different patterns. So, you know, even developing the vernacular, the materials, because those are very important. One other thing that we tried to do was actually looking for ways, asking other publishers if we can actually translate some of the books that were kind of close to relevant in our situation into Samoan. The pictures are there, but we always have this problem of translation, you know, of how to really picture the child, the level, the different reading levels that we have, emergent, you know, early readers and fluency. We had to have picture books, not just the ones that the poor teachers had to develop themselves without the pictures, but the pictures really help a lot with children in their reading and in the literacy levels. That's my bit to add in for that question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ainsley. I'm very conscious of the time now, and we have a couple of questions to ask. So I'm just going to ask this one, And I'm going to ask Aritesi and Helen to speak to that one. And then the next question, I will ask Linnell, Elaine, and Helen. So this one here is on the learning of English and of French. And we're talking about parents and the general public and how sometimes they think that using our vernacular languages for learning and teaching might have a negative impact on learning second or third languages. So my question to you too is how, or could you share on how to ensure that students can learn these languages effectively within multilingual models of education? Aritesi and Helen, please.
If Helen doesn't mind, if I go first.
Sure.
Yes, there's a tendency back home, like the parents don't want the teachers to teach English using Tikiribas, L1. But it is important for parents to note that in theory, it is okay to use L1 to teach L2. Because if you L1 plus L2 equals L1 plus L2. So it is important to incorporate L1 to increase L2. And the research findings show that in the multilingual classroom, the production of English is more than the production of English in a monolingual English classroom alone. I like to share to the parents that we are not, what's that word? What's the correct word? Like, we are not drowning English if we use L1. Because we need to, it is best to teach, like to have a qualified English teacher teaching English at the right level from the preschool to up to the senior secondary school, rather than using English as a medium of instruction in the compound to immerse students into learning English. Because there's also another research showing that this doesn't work as well, because the language inside the classroom is different from the language that these kids are actually saying outside the classroom. So here, I have to cut it short. I like to encourage the teachers to use L1 to teach L2 inside the classroom, and for teachers to know to understand the nation's four strengths, to know the importance of the roles of input, incomprehensible input and output, and the fluency development, and the focus on form. It is important because these principles underlying the second language acquisition is important for teachers to understand, especially English teachers. If we need to make sure that our kids will learn English using the right pedagogical approaches and using the right tools inside the classrooms. You can add on more to what I have just shared, but there is no, because back home the teachers think that if we use L1 to teach L2, there'll be no learning, but it is like the other way around. We're using more of L1 instead of L2, and then if we use more L1, then L2 won't take place. So it is important for teachers to consider this point. It is important, like if the students are not understanding the text, we tend to go back and use L1. But we are detracting, like it is, what you call it? It's like we are drowning L2 in L1. If you get what I mean, yeah. So yeah, so it is important for teachers, especially English teachers. And I know that there are a lot of English teachers joining Fiona's Zoom this evening that are from Kiribati, and it is important for them. I think they are studying this as well, but we need to help inform the community that it is okay to use L1, because that's the main issue back home. if the parents work outside your classroom and you're teaching English and when they hear you speak Kiribati, they'll go like, what is happening inside the classroom? But it is also important to make sure that you don't use a large amount of L1. It just use L1 to increase L2. So make it simple, that's simple. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's
Thank
what
you,
I want
Ari.
to share.
Thank you, Ari Tessie, and Helen.
Okay, I'll continue where our speakers just mentioned. Yeah, in the Vanuatu classrooms, this is what we wish. While children are busy developing their literacy skills in the vernacular, we have this ADEMAP approach. And this ADEMAP approach is a process to learn English and French gradually, beginning in year 1. And so we have all these resources that have been produced for teaching English gradually from years 1, years 2, 3, and 4. And as I mentioned earlier, Vanuatu uses this late exit model, and that allows the languages to be used in the classroom to assist learning till year 6 or even further. So we note when students have a high level of language and literacy skill in L1, they can use the skills in learning L2. And when an L2 is used in school for a longer period, students will perform well in their subjects. And the strategy, this strategy we use in ADEMAP goes this way. 1, teachers and students use the first language to assist the learning of the second language. 2, the teacher and the students speak in English to communicate in real meaningful way in the classroom in their subjects. And 3rd, the teacher concentrates on developing the students' oral skills in English or French. And by year 2 onwards, the teacher is required to teach lessons in English for 20 to 30 minutes each day. And that continues as well for in year 3 till year 4. So the teacher guides for the ADEMAP have been produced for this. So every day in the classroom, the teacher and the students use these types of languages to be able to communicate to each other. Because studying a second language is not that straightforward. We need to be able to understand what are the language situations in the classroom that the students need to be able to learn the second language and use that confidently in the classroom before they are exposed to the types of English that it's outside there. So we have these 4 types of languages that are used in ADEMAP. Firstly, we get students to look at instructions. That's to be able to listen to the focus of the lesson, follow, read instructions and rules quickly in order to do their lessons well. Then there's this social language where they have to talk naturally in informal situations like greetings, giving experience, introducing oneself, and introducing one family. Then we also have this 3rd type of language that the students need to know, and it's called learning. Talking about learning to monitor and assess, for example, asking questions, share their ideas, and reflect on what they learn in the lesson. Then finally, we have the subjects, and this is the interesting part. They have to learn the content of the subjects, and we know students, when they are learning the subject, there's a kind of language in each subject. So in the language, in the English and French, the language of the subject is very different to the other languages we use every day in the school setting, comparing to social conversation and instructions. Because subjects have very technical, abstract words, and the reading and writing is a lot more challenging. So when the students learn these types of languages of the classroom in L2, at the same time, they're learning new words, grammar, sound, spelling, and how to read and write well. So by the end of year 3, the focus of those language areas continue, but the language of instruction and social conversation are reduced, and there's more focus on the language of learning and the language of subjects. So for us to be able to think further, we know research have proved that having good schools, having quality standards, good resources, and teacher support, our students may need 5 to 7 years to be able to learn subjects in a second language very confidently. And within that period of time, students need about 7,000 to 8,000 words of L2 to be able to learn the subjects in L2. So this is where I'm just coming in quite fast, and I'm conscious of time, and just trying to relay what we have in the ADEMAP approach in Vanuatu.
Thank you. Thank you, Helen. I think now I'm just going to make a slight change to the procession of our webinar this evening. The last question that I'm supposed to be asking our panel, I'm going to ask the audience. So if you are able to answer on the chat, or if you want to, if Fiona can quickly unmute you so you can talk to this question. The question is on what's next. You know, now that we have the big picture thing about from the Conference of Pacific Education Ministers, there is a commitment to embedding culture and language into the curriculum. We now have heard the ladies talk about practice, about pedagogy, about research, about policy, challenges and successes. The question is, what's next? What do we need? What do we need to do now that this is all the things that we have at our disposal? These are all the tools we have. These are the policies. These are the languages of instruction. These are the percentages. What next? What do you think needs to happen in order to support the regional minister's vision for change? And then in the last, maybe last 10 minutes, I'm going to give our panelists one more go for a final take-home thought for all of you. So for the next maybe 15 minutes, I'm opening the floor up for people to give answers to the last question I was going to ask the panelists, but because we're running out of time, I'm handing it over now to the participants. Thank you, Rajen, for your questions. But if anyone would like to speak to the last question on what's next, these are the things that we have at our disposal. These are the tools that we have with us that's working in our own context. What should we do next? Or how can we run with this commitment that our education ministers have agreed to? Thank you. Okay, people can unmute themselves. So would anyone like to speak?
Unmute.
No? And then if not, then we can go back to our panelists. But if anyone would like to share what their thoughts are, how can we keep this momentum going? Or what kinds of things need to happen in our context for this to go forward, to advance it?
Hi, Hetty. Sorry, I came in the second hour of the series. But yeah, thank you so much, panelists. Good discussion. And one of the, I guess, one of the approach in which we can, what's to answer the question, what's next, is our to work closely with our tertiary education providers, our teachers, yeah, because they are the ones who are in the classrooms with our students, yeah. So it's important that our education providers, they provide a curriculum and they offer a program in which our student teachers are prepared to teach in the classroom, not only in the classroom, but beyond the classroom walls. It's also important that we bridge the gap between the classroom and our indigenous communities. That is also one of the findings that came about in my thesis, where parents or the communities, they said, we want to help out in the vernacular program, but the school, they don't utilize us, but we want to help. We want to be part of the vernacular project. So that's also important, because our communities, they need to feel that they own the languages. In that way, you know, the children, they will also appreciate where they come from, their background, and also value their identity. So yeah, these are the 2 points that I want to share with you all. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you too much, Karen. I see Rajan has raised his hand. Please go ahead, Rajan.
Yeah, thank you. I totally agree with what just Karen said. Most of the time we see these education commissions happening in high profile places, in hotels and other places. The outcome is signed by a group of people and then it is solved. The real thing is that the community is not consulted, or the community is not even aware of these things happening. And it becomes very difficult in the Melanesian countries, where we have lots of languages in the country, like some the Solomons, Vanuatu, Fiji, in this case. So it becomes even harder. So what we were talking about and what other speakers have alluded to is that, like, one of the things I heard from Arites is that the parents are not happily accepting the idea that English is taught in the L1. But that is only happening because the dissemination of information is not happening within the community. The community is not made aware of the importance of their own language, and by how we can maintaining language, we will preserve our culture and so much more than just the idea of education, getting a job. So that so wider consultations need to happen. If we go, I will just give a very simple example. In Fiji, when in 1948, I go back into the indenture area, when the colonial, the education commissions used to go from village to village to village to village, and everybody's response is recorded, which is still available today. The current one in Fiji just happened in Denarau. Even I was waiting for education commission to happen so I can contribute. So you see, we are getting too much influenced by the donors, the venue, the air condition, and all those stuff. The real stuff is not happening. And we as educators, as concerned people, need to, and I can see some former ministers here and people who are attached to the government and things like that. We need to tell the governments of all these island countries that you need to go to the people. Consultation is missing. We need that back. Vinaka.
Nakarajan, thank you for speaking out strongly and speaking honestly about where you think the challenges are and where we need to break down many barriers in order to advance strongly to make this a reality. Thank you. Thank you so much, Rajan. Anyone else? Talk about the challenges or what we need to do or what needs to happen. Even the panel themselves, if you have members of the panel, if you had an answer while we're waiting for others in the audience. We still have about 8 minutes before I go back to the panel for final comments. Yes, Fiona.
Sorry, I wasn't going to make that point out loud, but I put it in the chat. I'm just so struck today to hear the most senior people in the ministries using words like translanguaging. And these are not terms that are taken for granted in ministries of education. And it is just so refreshing to have some very senior staff, not just with us today, but in quite a few ministries at the current time who do have this background in applied linguistics. And as I said in the chat, we really can't take that for granted. Quite often at ministerial level, you can't assume applied linguistics knowledge. So I'm really happy that is the situation at the moment, and I hope that we can sort of do something at the current time to take advantage of having a few people who can really push these agendas at the policy level. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you also. Thank you, Fiona, and thank you also, Elaine. I see you've answered some questions on the chat, so others can have a look at that. Thank you, Seula, for joining us this evening and for your thoughts on our topic for today. Even our chat is very active this afternoon, but soon I will move back to our panel. If there's one more comment or one more question from the audience to the panel, before I hand it over to them for a couple of minutes each. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Robert. Robert, you can speak.
Okay, thank you, Hetty. And I really just wanted to take this chance to say hello and hi to so many good friends out there on the webinar today. And it's wonderful to sit back and listen to all of this great discussion going on. And I think you've asked about where do we go next? What next? Well, I think we just keep on keeping on, because we've been engaged on a very long marathon journey that's taken, some of us a long time to get to the point, to some of the positive points where we are now. But I don't think the finishing line is in sight. And I think we've got to do many more laps around the race course before we start to really see movement in some of the critical areas that we've been addressing today. And I think one of them is the one that Rajen was referring to, which is what's happening in our teacher education establishments. What are our new generations of teachers being taught? And that's a major issue in many of our countries to this point, because our teacher educators don't have the level of background and understanding of what sometimes what their own curricula are saying. And Helen Tamtam, I'm sure, is nodding her head in recognition of this in the case of Vanuatu at this point, that the national curriculum that is being developed is not actually being fully embraced or taught in the teacher education establishment. So there are a lot of gaps that remain, and we began by talking about this wonderful development at the level of the ministerial decision that has been made, and that's fantastic. But the trickle down effect sometimes gets very diluted, unfortunately. And I believe that in many of our countries, the ministers who were part of that meeting last year probably are now no longer ministers of education in the countries that they were representing at that time. And how much does that message get conveyed back through to directors of education and down through their ministries? Because my observation over a while in many countries is that the main stumbling blocks to what we're all trying to achieve are actually the leaderships of the ministries of education and the educational leaders in the teacher education establishments. And one of the things that will convince those people, I believe, is homegrown evidence. And because we've all been talking to them for many years about best practice international policy practices and methods, and people say, well, we don't always need to follow what happens in other countries. We need to have our own homegrown evidence. And I think it's really exciting that we're now developing some really good homegrown evidence of the proof of the pudding. The minister from Solomon Islands has referred to the projects that were carried out, the pilot projects that were carried out in the Solomons. And when we conducted the review of those, the evidence was very, very stark and very, very clear, not extensive, but a very strong hint that the students who went through those vernacular projects were ending up doing better in English in the secondary, higher on in their education than their other students who had only begun in English right from the very start. So that's a little glimmer of evidence, and Helen Tam-Tam didn't have time to talk about it today, but we're starting to see some hints in the national standardized assessment tests in Vanuatu that students who have been through schools where there was a strong vernacular component are doing better in the national tests in English and French. So we're building a body of homegrown evidence, and I hope that we can see a lot more of that. Anyway, enough for me from now, but congratulations to Fiona and participants. It's been a wonderful event today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert. I want to thank you particularly for naming the elephant in the room. And very often we tiptoe around when we talk about ministers and leaders and all of that. But it's really good to tell it like it is, because sometimes in our context, that is the reality of it. And so thank you very much for that and for your perspectives about language education in the Pacific. I now am running out of time, and I really want to give my panelists for this evening their final 2 minutes, I guess, to share with us a final take-home thought to take us away this evening. So I'm going to start with the person that I can see on the screen, Aritesi, and then we'll move through to the rest of the panelists. Malo.
Thank you. I'd like to share a very brief takeaway for you, for everybody to take away from this, from me. English teachers as my target. Keep in mind that quality is better than quantity. So quality reading, quality listening, quality input will produce quality output. Thank you very much.
Take it away, Aritesi. Helen.
Yes. Thank you so much. My final comment. I know bringing about change, especially vernacular teaching, has not been easy, but it's for the students' sake. We understand that there are systems and approaches that they do work in classrooms and nations, and also I think maybe my ending talk would be appealing to all community leaders, teachers, parents, that we all get behind this development of vernacular education, and also be able to learn the second language as well, and that we need everybody's support for the best possible opportunities for education for all our children. Thank you.
Thank you, Tomas, Helen. And now move on to Ainsley.
Right, thank you. Well, it's been lovely, joining this session. I think as a language specialist for many years at the ministry, I have developed this interest in everything to do with language, vernacular, anything. And what I've been doing, something to talk about too, after listening to the first session that you had with the media. I think the media is another very important group that should be brought in. And like what Bajan and Robert have said about bringing in the community, it will be through the media. And I think even with media, with our newspapers now, we once had a newspaper that had a Samoan language heading, maybe just a few pages, but now it has completely gone. There's nothing. So we no longer have local newspapers that have anything in the Samoan language. And if we can target the media, because they are the ones who use the language in different ways, and bring them in to have a proper training on what is going on, what is happening, maybe they will help drive this through. Because there's no point just talking about it, like with the ministers we have talked about, and from experience too, when I was with the ministry, after the meetings, the ministers will just give you this, and then we have to go out and do it without, or maybe with just a few stakeholders, and we're kind of half through with whatever we cannot understand fully what was behind all this. but we have to do it because we have been told to do it. But if we have that media to be involved, they will be the driving force to get people value their language, you know, have it talked about in the classroom, get everybody, like, you know, the other thing that I've seen that is changing now with Facebook, and, you know, we are now seeing overseas, it's funny how overseas communities like with Samoa and overseas, they have their own media all in the Samoan language. Why can't we all do that for our own languages, for whatever language that we speak? And the other thing that I have here for my final say, like what Robert or somebody else said about teachers, I think, and Arite, the teachers have to be well trained and competent in both, because we always have this problem. We go out and whichever language that the teacher is competent in, they will tend to use that more than maybe the vernacular, you know, and it's a sad story. And it's all because it comes back to them admitting that I'm not very confident in doing this. But if maybe they were properly taken through at training college, faculty of education, to understand English and the mother tongue language, you know, that would really help them, you know, work out whatever they can do to help us value our vernacular languages in education. Thank you.
Yeah, whawhetai tele lava, Ainsley. And now move on to Lanelle, please.
Thank you. My take-home thoughts for everyone. Firstly, I would like to say thank you to Dr. Fiona Willens for organizing this. And the theme, like language matters in the Pacific, is very important for all of us in terms of seeing research, home-based research. There's evidence there, and it's positive evidence. So it's about getting started somewhere, getting started. For other Pacific countries, they've already gone into the development of vernacular education. For some of us, like Solomon Islands, we've just done pilot projects, but to have it actually rolled out is still a challenge for us. But my take-home message is we should not give up. We work on the evidence, and it has to be a whole sector approach to support the language policy. And at the end of the day, having our students and the generation, the current generation and the generation to come, to have a deep appreciation of their language, which is their identity. And that is something that we need to hold dearly in the Pacific. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Thomas Lanelle. And now our last panelist who will end with her take-home message, Elaine.
Thank you everyone for being part of this discussion. Just a number of things. We began by a focusing question on the flyer, which asked, how do we embed what the ministers had committed to? So just very quickly, at regional level, we have the Pacific Education Framework, which provides opportunity for countries to then look at what their national priorities are and see how those national priorities can be enabled through the submission to the Pacific Education Regional Framework. Secondly, I think as part of region, again, one of the things that we have raised again and again and again is that we would like to see at USB a course that actually helps our teachers to understand how to teach our languages. We know there's English courses, there's other courses, but how do we teach Tokelau language? How do we teach Ngana Samoa, for example? So I'd like to see that at regional level in our regional owned institution of USB. Thirdly, I think there's so much richness across all of our contexts. Love to share. I'd love to hear more of what the projects are in that coming through Solomon's, for example. But I just wanted to share that our Ngana Tokelau curriculum as an example. For the first time, we laid out the progression of Ngana Tokelau as the first language. Then we laid out the progression of English as the language, the other language, and language for academic learning much later on. And then we saw how those two languages map onto each other and how one accelerates and then the other picks up on that. So we have an example of how two curriculum statements in two languages have been actually mapped out in terms of their progression, right down from year 1 right through to year 13 and next on to learning in tertiary. So there's an example. If you wish to have from us, we can forward you copies of that to share. Thank you for coordinating this wonderful discussion. I see Robert Early there. Love to talk to you some more about dictionary making, because I'm going to take a lot on to that. Because again, as I said at the beginning, this is about language planning. It is about our language stations. It is about our language structures if we are to advance our languages, as well as seeing it enrich our students in education for learning and to experience success in learning throughout the school system and beyond. Mo toku awanoa.
Yeah, malo aupito, malo aupito. So we come now to the end of our webinar this evening. Fiona told me to end it. She didn't tell me to summarize anything or to say anything else, and I wouldn't know how to do it, right? So what I'm thinking when I'm listening to everybody talking here, I think I have 2 more minutes, is that there are a lot of good wins that you have talked about. There are some good things already happening in our islands. We don't want those good winds to be blowing into torn sails. Yeah, we have a proverb in Tonga, matangilele toge la mahai, meaning a good wind blowing into torn sails is not going to move the boat forward, the waka forward. So I'm thinking all of these policies, all of these commitments, all of these practices, all of these resources, all of these plans, they are the good winds, but we don't want them to blow into torn sails because something is missing or somebody damaged it some years before and nobody repaired it, or some cyclone came and now we don't really want to do this or that. So we don't want all of this good work to go to waste. We want it to be blowing. We want these good winds to be blowing into sails that are full and are fully repaired and ready to go. So on behalf of Dr. Fiona and her organizing committee, I want to firstly thank the panelists for this evening. Malo aupito for saying yes, and for sharing with all of these people, this audience of 70, but there were more earlier on. So I think they've had to rush off somewhere. Thank you so much for joining, and hopefully I'll see you again in the next seminar. Malo aupito o fato.